On this 14th day of April 2022. Please rise if you're able and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Supervisor Schneiderman.
Here.
Councilwoman McNamara. Here. Councilman Martell.
Present.
Councilman Bouvier.
Here.
Councilman Scavone.
Present.
So two of us are present.
Three of us are here.
Three of us are here. All right, here now. All right, so we are going to start our work session with an update on COVID. We are meeting in person, which is nice. And Ryan Murphy, our public safety director, is here, who's also been our COVID coordinator throughout the pandemic. And Ryan's just going to give us the latest on COVID.
Sure. Thanks, Supervisor. Wish we didn't have to be here to talk about this today, but the numbers are going up. It's just worth, making sure that people are aware of it. To give a kind of a synopsis, an example of what the change has been, on March 30th, we were running at about 4.7, 4.8 people per day in the town between then and the end of February 22nd to March 30th. That was the average, about 4.7 per day. And between March 30th and April 10th, we've actually shifted within the town to about 8.3 per day. So we've doubled. And that's the data from the Suffolk County Health Department, which doesn't necessarily take into account a lot of the home testing that's going on if the people aren't reporting.
Period.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, most people now are testing at home.
Yes, and they can go on and self-report by way of the county website if they're looking to generate any kind of excusal from work or school letter, but a lot of people aren't anymore. So those numbers I would expect are, reasonably higher than what we're seeing.
Yes.
And, the national data is suggesting that the numbers in the northeast portion of the United States right now are higher than elsewhere, which these different waves that we've experienced have seemed to trend where we're seeing a heightened number first, and then it starts to progress to other places.
I don't think that county data, that particular data point is really that helpful anymore.
So locally,
the hospital numbers are helpful.
right. So the hospital for 5 days in a row until yesterday was at zero.
That's right.
Zero COVID census at the hospital. Yesterday that changed to 1.
Okay.
Today, it's still 1. They're looking at what the trends are as well, and skeptical to a certain degree that they'll stay at 1 or 0 because we're seeing increased numbers. They're almost expecting that they may see some increases as well.
Is this variant though milder than earlier variants, or
There-
are treatments now?
There haven't been any real indicators that this is causing any increased, effects where it's causing more people to enter, hospital setting.
It seems
So-
like this is affecting this variant affects the lungs less than the earlier version of COVID that went around. So it's more congestion and things like that, but less respiratory.
That anecdotally, that has been something that I've heard
And
as
there's more
well.
therapeutics available now to people
Right.
too. So
Right. Where as with Omicron, we were in a very different place with Omicron and the spread of that than we were at the very beginning of COVID, when we saw more severity in patients in hospital settings, because we just didn't have some of the treatments that were available. It was very early on in the pandemic. We're at a different place now than we were before. I think many of the treatments that they have are still holding up quite well with the new variant. The vaccines are still holding up quite well with the new variant. So people that have gotten vaccinated, been boosted, are still doing pretty well. It doesn't mean, as we all, I think, know at this point, it doesn't mean that you're going to not be able to get COVID. The same way if you get a flu vaccine in the past, you could still get the flu, but the impacts that you would experience were far less. So there's still tremendous value to getting vaccinated in that it should really minimize the impacts that you experience if you get COVID. And I think that's kind of where we're at. The variant's not proving to be as severe in general, but people that have been vaccinated are not experiencing symptoms that would require for them to, enter a hospital setting. And even if people do enter a hospital setting, generally we're not seeing so far that it's causing a lot of people to end up in, ICU or intubated, as we saw earlier in the pandemic when we didn't have some of the treatments and vaccines and everything like that available. People just need to make good choices at this point, in my opinion. We've given everybody the knowledge, unless you've been completely turned off from the world, you know what's going on. You know there are vaccines available. You know that if you mask, you can reduce the chances of you getting something or spreading something. And people need to make the right choices based on their own immune system, their family situations, the environment that they find themselves in, and they need to try the best they can to go about their business, but doing so in a safe way. I think that's really where we're at this point.
Ryan, does the current technology for test kits work as the variants change? I know you're not a scientist, but I mean, right, but I
But I
trust
stayed
you.
in the Holiday Inn one.
Yeah.
There's been no indication that the test kits that are out there won't work with the current variants that we're dealing with.
Good.
And remember, I mean, we hear about these new variants that are appearing. That doesn't mean that like the old stuff is gone either.
Mm-hmm.
So even when Omicron was the most prevalent form that was out there, that was because it was, 50 some odd percent or 60% of the cases that were coming up were turning out to be the Omicron variant. That still leaves 40% of it that was Delta or this or that or the other thing. So when we hear about the new variant, BCA-R2D2, whatever it happens to be, it doesn't mean that the old stuff is gone. So testing is still viable for a lot of those other forms, and it still is proving to be effective for the new stuff too.
In terms of getting test kits, there's no shortage?
I think they're widely available in the stores at this point, but we also have them available at the town. We've done some very successful distributions at several of the supermarkets. We tried to do them at many town facilities, and we actually found that not many people were coming out to get them, so we capitalized on audiences that were already going to supermarkets, and thanks to the cooperation of like King Cullen and Stop and Shop and Lidl, we were able to position ourselves in front of their locations throughout the town and distribute. And in those cases, we gave out at least 100 kits in each location per day that we were out there. We still have them available, and we'll be putting out a notice from the town in the next day or so, well, probably post-holiday, just to let people know that they can pick them up either at Town Hall or at our facility in Hampton Bays. If they're in need of kits, we still have them available from the town.
We got them through the county?
We got them through the county.
Are we getting more?
I don't know if they're still distributing or not, but we do have we don't need to ask for more right now. We have enough in stock to be able to continue to hand them out.
The expiration date?
The ones that we have right now are good through at least July.
Okay.
So if people need them, they're still good for quite some time.
That's the thinner box, right?
Yes.
That's good
That's
through
the two
July. And the
test
thicker box is,
End of May, I believe.
And Ryan, where in Town Hall?
I'm going to set it up with the security desk so that people don't even have to go past that point, and I'll give him a log sheet and a couple of boxes just to be able to hand them out as people come in. And I know many of the town board members have distributed them out to different organizations in the community. We've given them out through OLA, through Blaze Church, through St. Rosalie's, the Baptist Church in Bridgehampton. And each time we were at a supermarket, we gave them enough for their employees. And we've also handed them out to all of the performing arts organizations within the town of Southampton too, because obviously those are settings where their employees are exposed to people coming in and out any given day, shows, performances, etc. So we wanted to make sure that they had some available too. All right.
other questions for Ryan? In terms of restrictions, protocols, town hall is status quo, right? You do
Correct.
not, we're not requiring masks at town hall.
Correct.
Or the people required to show their vaccination cards
No.
anymore? No.
No.
You're able to walk right in.
And there are no, other than public transportation, which was just extended until May 3rd by the federal government, there are no other restrictions out there right now.
Okay, and then in terms of meetings, are the boards all now, maybe Jim would know this, everybody's meeting in person?
That's
Or
actually
still
been a question
using
that's
Zoom?
come up.
We're developing stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
The state just passed some legislation in the budget to be able to allow local municipalities to set some of their own rules.
Well, I think the provision, the suspension of the open meetings law,
Good for another 60, less than
up
60
to
days.
June now. They've extended that, I believe, to June. So you can have Zoom meetings. We can if we want to.
You
It was
can.
gonna expire April 15th, which
It was given another 60 days when they passed the budget. So it's 60 days from the date that the budget was passed.
right.
Which was that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can have Zoom, and then the state, the new rules are less about COVID and more about accessibility.
Correct.
So we can, and I'm sure Jim is gonna talk us through that at some point, or somebody's gonna talk us
Yeah.
through it. We can have hybrid meetings. That's
Yeah.
possible where, as long as there's a quorum present in the room. So actually, some of the town board members could be here electronically. The public could weigh in.
Right. Again, it goes back to the access. If you're
But we
going to
have
be
to,
hybrid, they
we have to promulgate those rules. We're gonna have
Right.
to pass legislation and saying these are how things are going to operate. So we'll have to do some sort of local law that accompanies it, but
Yeah,
at some point, we'll have that conversation.
right. I think there were some conditions on board members and
Yeah.
how they would be exempt from being in person.
It'll be on the agenda in 2 weeks.
We could talk about
We have it, Frank, for
For the 28th.
the 12th, so we're gonna have this conversation on the 28th, so.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
any other
because I know
questions?
planning board is still meeting by Zoom.
Yeah, this,
Which is still allowable
Right.
until, as you guys said,
And they seem to
June.
prefer that, that's at least,
yeah, there's been some questions both on, I know, and Katie's been asking about the zoning board as well. I think there's, questions about, can they, I think you're right, Councilman, I think if they can do it, I think some prefer to, stay Zoom, remote if they
yeah,
can.
certainly, I know the feedback we get is the public are like that because you get more public.
Yeah, sure, right, you're right, it can, right.
I
So
have,
there's pros and cons.
Some people
yeah,
get
I
dissuaded
have
from
mixed
driving.
feelings
from-
about it. I think that, and sometimes I'll watch planning board or zoning board meetings on CTV. Because when somebody, let's say, a neighbor who's in opposition is able to appear face to face and, share their concerns, I just think it resonates more than on Zoom
Yeah,
for some reason, that you're actually,
yeah.
seeing them. So I do sort of like the in-person
Mhm.
Yeah.
for
Particularly
these
for,
kinds of things,
Right.
but,
Well, I think we'll have a proposal to discuss with the board in 2 weeks, but obviously there are also going to be some minimum standards set by the legislation from the state that we have to adhere to with regards to presence and accessibility. So we'll see what we want to do, locally, and then obviously stay within the lines of whatever we're allowed to do by the state.
and the nature of the boards are different, whereas the zoning board, every application is a hearing, so they have a lot of hearings, so. Like Katie had mentioned was a good point, that she felt that because of every application is a hearing, she thinks that they function better in person because of that situation.
Yeah,
There's more give and take and back and forth.
yeah, that's, I think, what I was trying to say
Yeah,
too.
sure.
so,
Yeah.
For zoning board.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you, Ryan.
You got it? Thanks.
All right, pretty much on schedule here. So we're going to move on to our next item, which is the proposed new Chapter 141, Community Housing Fund, and amendments to Chapter 140, Community Preservation Fund. We have a number of individuals joining us. So Kara Back, who is our Director of Housing and Community Development, Kelly Doyle, Assistant Town Attorney, and Mark McRedmond, Assistant Town Attorney. And I'll let Kara largely introduce this, but this has to do with the passage of state legislation which allows the town to create a surcharge on property transfers that will create a fund for creating workforce housing, affordable housing throughout the town, and we have an opportunity to participate by putting it on the ballot and let the voters decide whether we should impose this surcharge. So with that, Kara, do you want to take it from there?
Yep, and this is our first step in that process. So, as everyone knows, affordable housing within the township is at a crisis point. And we know that because of the limited availability of affordable housing, it is difficult for local employers to hire and retain employees. It is challenging for fire, EMS, and other volunteer services to recruit members. And it is challenging for our younger and older generations to continue to live here. Although the town has benefited from increased tourism and second home ownership, the town board will need to find ways to increase affordable housing opportunities in order to sustain the local economy and community services. Recently, Governor Hochul gave the 5 East End towns the authority to establish the Peconic Bay Region Community Housing Act, which allows the town of Southampton to create a dedicated fund that will assist in alleviating the housing crisis and increase the affordable housing opportunities within the town. Through this act, the town of Southampton can raise money for affordable housing, similar to the way money is raised for the Community Preservation Fund. The Community Housing Fund will raise money with a 0.5% additional real estate transfer tax added to the existing 2% Community Preservation Fund tax. It is important to note that under the Act, the current exemption imposed under the CPF will be raised under this law from $250,000 to $400,000 in the town of Southampton, so that everyone purchasing a home with a price tag under $1 million will actually pay less real estate transfer tax. In order to complete the establishment of the Act, the town board will need to pass a local law that will create the Community Housing Fund and impose the tax. This local law is subject to a mandatory referendum, so voters will see this on the ballot this November. In addition, before the town can spend any of the money raised through the Act, the town must prepare and adopt a housing plan that will outline for the public how the town will use the fund. Such a plan has been drafted, and there will be a separate work session and public hearing scheduled to discuss the plan with the public. If this tax was available in 2021, the fund would have raised approximately $29 million to be used for community housing. In 2020, it was about $20 million. In 2019, which was pre-COVID numbers, about $10 million. The town attorney's office has drafted the proposed legislation necessary to amend Town Code Chapter 140, the Community Preservation Fund, in order to create the new Community Housing Fund and establish the tax. So I'd like to give them the opportunity to speak about the new legislation.
Numbers you quoted in terms of how much it would have generated, are you just taking 0.5% based on the number that was generated, or are you adjusting it for the changing thresholds as well?
No, we did not adjust it for that changing threshold, so it
Right.
might be,
Yeah, because my numbers were lower than yours.
Okay,
About 25
Yeah,
million.
mine as well, so I'm a little.
okay, yeah, so it might be that, it might
So,
be-
and just for really the public's edification, so in this change in legislation, we go, right now, the first 250,000 in Southampton is exempted from the CPF tax.
right,
That number goes up to, I think, 450,000 is exempted.
right.
400.
400? All right,
Yep.
400,000. So that's really what I was asking about.
Yeah, so when we calculate our numbers, we did not make that adjustment.
So a home, if there's such a thing that sells under $1 million in the town of Southampton, and there are some, they actually will pay potentially less tax under this scenario.
That's right,
Anything over $1 million would pay more tax.
yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and that distribution of homes, million and under, that's an important number to understand with how that's laid out as well. So the percentages are interesting. We should go over those numbers. 'Cause
Okay, yeah.
it's not quite as easy as it sounds.
But in an average year, I would say 15 million to 20 million the fund could generate.
And at this point, it should be noted that first-time homebuyers still have the exemption on the entire Community Preservation Fund if this were to pass.
That's correct,
Yes.
yep.
Yes.
That's good.
All right, so you're gonna turn it to Mark, is that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
I like your Ukraine tie.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
Thank you.
He's got a collection of them. He's the man.
I thought you were wearing my school tie for a minute.
Your school was not in Ukraine. I hope. We're here today, my colleagues, Ms. Bach and Ms. Doyle, and myself, to discuss a proposed local law to establish a community housing fund. First off, does everyone have a copy of the draft public hearing notice with the proposed local law?
Yes.
If you don't, we can get you on pretty
No,
quickly.
I actually don't have it in my package, but I do have it in my
Plan.
distribute. Great.
Printed it out.
I'm gonna pass them down. Anybody?
You have an extra one, Cal, down
Yep, I have a whole bunch, so I'll
Thank-
pass
Yeah,
them
just
on.
pass them. Do that one?
I do, yeah.
By way of background, on October 8th, 2021, the Peconic Bay Community Housing Fund Act was signed into law as Chapter 445 of the laws of 2021, which authorizes each of the Peconic Bay towns to establish a community housing fund in order to expand housing affordability on the east end of Long Island. This community housing fund can be used to provide financial assistance to first-time home buyers of up to 50% of the purchase price in the form of either a grant or a loan. It can be used to acquire property to be used for housing, offered either for sale or rent. It can be used to create housing for sale or rent, to rehabilitate existing structures for housing, and also for housing counseling services, and to enter into public-private partnerships to provide housing opportunities and employee housing for local businesses. As Cara previously mentioned, the fund would be financed by a 0.5% real estate transfer tax, which would be in addition to the existing 2% transfer tax, which currently funds the Community Preservation Fund. The legislation also increases the exemption on the entire transfer tax from $250,000 to $400,000 for developed properties in the town. This exemption applies to transfers of $2 million or less. If implemented, the law, as Cara previously stated, will actually result in a tax cut for transfers under $1 million in the town due to the increased exemption. Additionally, the purchase price limit for the first-time home buyer exemption would be increased from 120% to 150% of the purchase price limit. In order to implement this law, the town must pass a local law creating the fund, imposing the supplemental transfer tax, and increasing the exemptions. Thus, the purpose of the local law before you is to create the housing fund, establish the supplemental 0.5% transfer tax, and go ahead and increase the exemptions from that tax. The approval of this local law in terms of a timeline is subject to a mandatory referendum to be held at the November 8th general election, which means that in order for the law to become effective, a simple majority vote of the voters in the November 8th election would have to vote in favor of adopting this local law. If that local law is adopted and approved at the election, the tax would apply to conveyances occurring on or before April 1st of 2023. From a timing perspective, any ballot proposition must be delivered to the Board of Elections on or before August 8th in order to appear on the November 8th ballot. So if the board wishes to move forward with this, the earliest date that a public hearing could be scheduled would be May 24th. And just some other notes regarding the Housing Fund and also its relationship to the Community Preservation Fund. The existing transfer tax for the CPF, Community Preservation Fund, is currently set to expire on December 31st, 2050. The supplemental tax the supplemental tax would also be set to expire on December 31st, 2050. And an advisory board would have to be established with 7 to 15 legal residents of the town who would serve without compensation, including representatives of the construction industry. There must be one representative of the construction industry, one representative of the real estate industry, one representative of the banking industry, 3 representatives of local housing advocacy or human services organizations, and at least 1 resident from any participating village, along with at least 1 member from the Shinnecock Indian Nation. An important point is that the CPF and CHF, that's Community Preservation Fund, as you all know, and Community Housing Fund, are separate funds, and they would be used for separate purposes. The Housing Fund tax would be administered and collected in a like manner as the Preservation Fund tax, but the revenues from the taxes would be entirely separate. The existing 2% continues to go to one fund for CPF purposes, such as open space, parks, historic places, and the 0.5% increase would go to a separate fund dedicated only to housing.
Could I just add that there's also 20% of that total is going to water quality, so the public understands that it's not 100%, it's 80% for land preservation and 20% for water quality.
Thank you. That's a good point. Thank you, Councilman. As far as village participation is concerned, it is optional, but however, the villages are subject to the supplemental tax regardless of whether they participate. And of course, an intergovernmental agreement would have to be executed between the town of Southampton and the village of Southampton, or any of the other villages. With regard to the first-time home buyer exemption, that would be increased from 120% to 150% of the purchase price limit. And the calculations are determined by the State of New York Mortgage Agency. So currently, the purchase price limit is $863,940, which is, let's say, 120%, for example, of $719,950. So using the current purchase price limit, the first-time home buyer exemption would be increased in order to apply to purchases of up to $1,079,925. Currently, the income limit for example, a 3-person or more household would be $145,480. And lastly, it is important that people wishing to take advantage of this first-time home buyer exemption would have to apply at least 1 week before closing. That's it.
Right now, they should apply actually after closing, can't they? You get reimbursed
Yes, for CPF.
for CPF.
Yep.
But this exemption, you have to apply ahead of time.
Yes.
Well, you would need to, because the way that this would work would, yeah, I believe you would. I believe you would have to apply for it ahead of time,
I think that's what Mark was saying,
yeah.
a week ahead of time to qualify.
Right.
At least 1 week, yes.
Is that a change from our current?
It is.
Only?
Yeah, because they can get a reimbursement after the fact. They would have to
Currently.
pay, with CPF, they pay the 2% at the closing, and then they have to get reimbursed. You know, if they're a first-time home buyer, they can be reimbursed for that 2% that they paid.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what, typically in
Yeah,
our
but-
meetings, we're doing these resolutions to reimburse people.
Right.
CPF funds that were paid.
Right.
So in this change is they have to have at least a week ahead of time. Is that just for the extra 0.5% or probably the whole thing?
Well, I was assuming it was the 0.5%.
It's for the, it's my understanding it would be for the 0.5% increase regarding the Community Housing Fund.
Okay.
Yeah, so it doesn't have the widespread impact.
Right, any other questions?
Why would we want to change it? Let's keep it the same.
Yeah,
It's not up to us.
It's in the-
State law.
It's in the,
it's in the state law.
Right.
there it is. We're preempted. All right. Moving on.
Exactly. Yeah, that's not what you guys are proposing, that's in the state.
It
law.
is, that's correct.
Wouldn't it be easier for the town if it wasn't a reimbursement and it was done beforehand anyway?
Yeah,
Probably.
Yeah,
Sure,
I think it probably would be.
yeah. For everybody.
Us
So,
included,
the buyer doesn't have to come up with the money.
money, and we don't have to,
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it would impact other things if it was for the whole fund, particularly for multi-year projects, water quality things and things like, that have multiple years in front of them, so.
So-
This makes sense
Okay.
to me.
The
So-
attorneys will know.
Is the local law that would establish the fund, correct? And
It
does
closely,
this itself doesn't put it on the ballot, or does it?
This does not put it on the ballot. So what would happen, you would have the notice of public hearing, you would have your public hearings, and then you would have your notice of adoption, and then in the notice of adoption, so you would go ahead and adopt it, that would put it on the ballot.
Well, the ballot proposition is in here.
It is in there.
That's
but
why we need it by the 24th, correct, in order to,
The 24th
timing
could be the
for
first
that.
public hearing, and then you could have two public hearings, well,
could,
as many as you
okay.
want, but from a time perspective, you could have two, and then still be fine with the notice of adoption. And then we would have to get the transcript, with the translation, and get that to the Board of Elections by August 8th, but we need some time for the transcript and the translation.
okay.
So the local law public hearing would be separate from the housing plan public hearing?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Did Assemblyman Thiel assist in drafting this?
Yes, he
Okay.
provided a model law,
Okay,
so it's very close to what he gave us.
okay. So if we schedule a public hearing and then pass this, then it would be on the ballot.
Yes.
And then if the voters approve it, then the tax is imposed. And
Yes.
it would go into effect, I guess,
April 2023.
April of 2023.
Yep. April 1st, 2023. So that would be conveyances occurring on or after April 1st, 2023.
Okay. So, in terms of putting it on the ballot for this year, I guess a couple questions. So one is, I know there's a statutory time frame. You can't do it before a certain date, you can't do it after. So you were saying that if we did it we held the public hearings, what, in July, or when would it be?
You could start, I believe it's May 24th or
24th.
24th.
May
You could
24th?
have one public hearing, and then if you, I don't know how many you want to have, if you wanted to have another public
Let's
hearing.
assume two.
To the beginning of June, and then the end of June, you could put on your notice of adoption.
When would we have to adopt it by?
July.
So we have to submit to the Board of Elections by August 8th. And we want to have some time to get everything ready, so I would like to have it done by July.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I guess,
We can do that.
and with the public hearings would
With
give
two
us
public hearings.
a sense of where the public is on
Right.
this issue. You know, I hate to put it on the ballot to not have it pass. Though I understand, we can't use government funds to promote, a vote yes or vote, kind of thing. We can individually do that. We certainly can educate the public about what is on the ballot. So, hopefully this would be a good year to put it on the ballot. I don't know, there's a lot of propositions potentially on the ballot. But the crisis is, is here. It's here, and it would be, to me, a very helpful tool to have some funds available, particularly for doing things like helping somebody bridge the affordability gap. If somebody can afford, $400,000 home, and there's really nothing on the market for less than $500,000.
Right.
If we could help with that through either taking an interest in the home or a very low interest loan, where we, could actually get the money back, it would be like a revolving loan.
On a sale.
And then we can help other people too. So I think that, maybe helping people build accessory apartments, there might be some ways to use this fund to really make a fundamental difference. I know Tommy John and John and Carrie, you guys have been working on the housing plan with, is it VHB?
Yeah, VHB.
VHB, trying to figure out sort of how the money, if available, could be used to increase the ability for some of our workforce to actually live within the community, cut back on some of the traffic.
Right.
And you'll be hearing about that in a separate.
Yeah, and a separate,
process.
separate thing. So I guess it's really, this is a good time to ask questions. I'm willing to introduce the resolution to have the public hearing. If other people want to co-sponsor that, I'm happy to have
Absolutely.
co-sponsors on it.
And just to your point, that there's already groups that are well aware of this and are working outside of government, NGOs, to promote this fund.
Yeah, I mean,
I think
if
it's
it could,
important.
if it could be half as successful as the CPF has been in creating open space, if it could be half as successful, a quarter as successful in creating some places for our workforce to live, then it would be tremendous, so, you know, creating affordable housing isn't just a financial issue, that's one piece of it. It's an important piece, having the financial resources. You also have to, you know, have a community that's willing to accept it. You need to have the zoning that will allow it. You need to have the, you know, political will to make it happen and put policies in place. So I think there's a lot of components, but certainly the funding piece is an important component of it. And it'll allow us to do some of the things that might require a higher level of subsidy than other things, like bridging the affordability gap, helping somebody buy a home that they couldn't afford otherwise. So.
Well, it could work to help our housing authority leverage other loans through the state and federal government. You know. So that would be good. I'd like to co-sponsor it as well.
Okay.
The plan that we're going to be looking at is actually an update to our comprehensive plan, our 1999 comprehensive plan, which is required in the state law that was passed and signed by the governor. East Hampton Town is going forward with this. They are going to be putting something on their ballot. Shelter Island is working on it, and I'm not sure about the North Fork, Southold and Riverhead. They can do this as well, but they're not where we
Well, their
are
CPF
in
one
developing
is
their
also- yeah.
comprehensive
And
plan.
there's no requirement that all 5 towns
Right.
have to
Right.
be in it, so.
Right, so
All
they're
5 towns
individual.
can't, actually, just because it's their condition, like Riverhead still has some issues in covering their CPF, the debt service on stuff
They-
like
they
that,
can.
too. Yeah, but
All 5
I'm-
can,
it still
right.
affects it, so how
Right.
they approach it. I mean, I would hope
But
that
that's up
all
to
of
them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, it's
I
up to
hope
them,
that
but
they
there's no
would all-
requirement that everybody has to be in before
Right.
it's effective, so.
So the
So
only-
that's, yeah, go ahead. So
I
so
just-
far we have 3 people,
I just had a question.
yeah.
As far as who qualifies for this, it wouldn't be like the CPF fund where, you know, the board decides on what property to purchase. You'd have to meet a specific number of qualifications, and as long as you met that, you would qualify?
As far as the individual, or?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. The individual has to income qualify.
Okay.
As a first-time home buyer, and under the income level, I think Mark had mentioned, for a family of 3, it's just over $145,000.
So it wouldn't be a board saying yes or no, it would be more?
Well, there is an advisory board between, 7 and 15 community, members.
But not
So-
for the individual.
But-
We,
okay.
Right.
we employ a lottery system, and I'm sure there would be a lot of people who are interested in this, and
Yep.
I mean, it's fair to say that side of things won't change. Is that,
Correct,
Right, if
right.
it's for affordable
For-
housing units, then you'll have the lottery system, but there's a lot of different functions in this plan, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly, yep.
There's
And a lot of
grant
that's already-
monies, there's rehabilitation monies, there's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And then, we also have our resales of community benefit units, and we use the lottery system for that. So if somebody wants to resell, a current community benefit unit, we have people ranked as their names were pulled from that lottery, and we connect them to, to the seller, so that they can sell it to a qualified buyer.
Well, thank you. I think we need as many tools as we can
Absolutely.
have, so I'd like to co-sponsor as well.
it's a good question. And I think it's, Section 216 in our code spells a lot of this out already.
Yes, yep.
So we'll be working on that, so.
Are we restricted in terms of who can be the beneficiaries of the fund by a percentage of median income? Or do we have flexibility to say, you're priced out of the housing market, even though you make 140% of median income, and we want to help you, or are we limited to, let's say, 120% of median income? Do you know? I didn't see it in this law.
Yes, the people who can receive funding through a grant or loan by the town, they have to income qualify. So there is a limit as to how much income they can make. And right
But
now,
who sets that limit? Is it in the state law? Or
it's in the state law, yeah,
State law.
it's a Sony May limit. It's based on the 100% of the Sony May limit, which right now, for a family of 3, is $145,000.
Okay.
That's something that could change if,
As Sony
Sony
May
May
changes each
changes.
year,
Is
that will change.
120% or 130?
It's 100%. The income is 100% of the Sony May limit.
Is there a geographical thing there?
Yes,
too? Like
yeah,
pocket
in
areas?
Suffolk County,
Yeah.
yep. Yep.
So that, no one who makes above that can get a grant or loan from this program?
That's correct.
Okay, because a lot of our programs that we have done have gone 120%
Yeah,
of
based,
median income.
right, and this is different. This is based upon that Sony May limit.
Okay.
No, but I think it's good, in fact,
Yeah.
because now it's covering
More
these
limits.
different income levels. And we have the ability to make those adjustments between those two.
Right.
In particular. So I think that opens up the ability to create housing far more.
Yeah,
than
so-
we can do now under the current conditions.
Right, so we have our current community benefit units, which are also income qualified at 120% of the AMI, the area median income. So those are our current community benefit units. This will be different. This will be a grant or a loan program that will be based upon the Sony May limits, 100% of the Sony May income.
So is there any aspect of this program that could help somebody at 120%? Or no, it's all restricted?
This is all restricted. Under the legislation, the state legislation, it's restricted to that Sony May cap.
Okay.
Which the 145 might be more than the 120, right? Is it?
It actually,
It
it
is.
does.
Yeah, right.
It is a little bit more than the 120% of the AMI
Right.
right now.
And it also fluctuates over
It,
time.
it
so-
will,
Yeah.
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 120% of the AMI is 109,000 for
That's
a
quite a
single
bit.
person.
But what's it for?
124 for 2 people.
Yeah.
124 for 2.
The area median
3, so
income.
Right, so
three
that's
is
the
about-
problem, is if you're 2 people making a combined income of 150,000, you're still completely priced out of the housing market.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're not gonna be able with this fund to help them.
But with this fund, we can do other
Other
things that can
things.
help.
And we also
That's
have
right.
town programs that
Yes.
will help with.
Th-
We have
That's,
other programs.
that's strictly restricted to the grant or the loan part of it. So we can do other things under this fund, but to give a first-time home buyer a grant or a loan, we are their income
Okay.
is restricted.
But if we were, let's say, creating units, we
Then-
could still, we could go up to 120% or whatever.
That's correct.
Town.
Because, right, because.
Yeah, that's what I
you're-
was asking, whether
Yep.
there was aspects that could go above 100%.
I'm sorry, yes, so yes, there are other parts of this fund that can do different things, and we would not be restricted in those parts, to be able to give somebody a home.
Okay. Any other questions? Anybody else? Do you want to co-sponsor too, Rick? or-
Yes, please.
All right, so it sounds like we have all 5 that want to co-sponsor this, so which is great. I'm going to suggest that we do a minimum, we have to do 2 hearings on it. It's too
Right.
big.
Sure.
Okay.
And I'd like to do one east and one west of the canal.
okay.
So if we could, because I feel like we need to do our best, if we're gonna, unless we do it by Zoom, and I'm assuming in person, if we could schedule one maybe for Hampton Bays and one for here.
Would both of those be
I'm not sure how
evening?
you're gonna do that, though. If you wanna have 2 evening meetings at different parts of the town, you'd have to go to 3 public hearings. So just be,
Well, we could have a special meeting.
because I think most people in the community would, in different areas, if not sitting here, coming here, would want that to be in the evening. So there's more access to the town board.
Well, we could
Add a
set,
special?
we could have them a month apart.
Or to have 2 specials at 6 or something like
We
that.
could, or we could schedule, we could do the evening meeting in May, and the evening, toward the end of May, right? And the evening meeting toward the end of June.
We could do that.
So we'd have the, let's say, the evening meeting at the end of June, maybe we'd do that in Hampton Bays at the senior center. If we can, I think we can do CTV live there. I think there's a head-in.
Or do you want to just make it a special meeting in Hampton Bays?
Yeah, we
On an
could do
evening.
that too. I'll leave it up to the lawyers to figure out how to properly notice it.
We'll figure
But
that
do
out.
we all agree that this is
Yeah.
important enough that we should try to get as available to the public? Because, it does address the housing crisis, but, a lot of people are homeowners, and it could impact when they sell their home. It's a little bit more that the purchaser, in some cases less, but it depends on the home. There may be some people who are concerned that it will affect the selling price of the house. We had this when we did the regular 2% CPF tax. People were worried about that. It actually had the opposite effect. Instead of lowering the value of the house,
Right.
it increased the value of their house. I know people in the real estate community were concerned about the initial transfer tax. But ultimately, you were preserving the character of your community, the rural character, and adding common lands. And it ultimately drove the price up, not down. And here you're preserving the sustainability of your community by making sure we have people who can volunteer at the ambulance or the fire department, or, the nurses and the school teachers, and who actually run the community. So having a workforce available and maybe reducing some of the traffic, could be positive on property values as well. So.
You mentioned the real estate lobby. Well, at least in Albany, Jay, they did support this bill, particularly with the exemption being raised from $250,000 to $400,000. So they signed on to this as it was being argued. So that was good.
Yeah, I know for me, although it's, it's an extra 0.5% on a purchase, it's going to a cause that really needs it. I think a lot of people will support the idea of creating it. And I'm hoping too that having that kind of funding available will allow us to do the kinds of things that maybe are a little bit more expensive, but also less controversial. So, more of the bridging the affordability gap. The home's there, but now it can be purchased by somebody working in the community, not just by somebody who's looking for a summer home. We might not have been able to help in a situation like that. And that's easier than doing an apartment, though I'm not saying we shouldn't do,
New builds.
apartment buildings on the right locations where, we can build the community support. I think that there's an economy of scale there, and that's important too. And a lot of people are looking for rentals. It's a big issue right now. Affordable rents are going up across the board, and so many people are telling me that they're leaving the community now because their rents have gone up and it just doesn't work anymore to live here, and they can't find another place. They want to move, they have to move out because they can't afford the rent, and there's no place else to rent.
Yeah, my office gets calls every single
Yeah,
day.
so we're having a real crisis with rentals, and we could help with that as well. I don't know if we could help bridge a rent gap, but we could certainly maybe help create affordable rentals, whether it's an accessory apartment or a complex, like we did at Sandy Hollow or Beyond Commons. Even though we used a private developer to do that, we played a role there.
It's a form of rent control in some ways, and that staves off the other complaint that people have, that the rentals just turn into income generators for the owner. You have two sides of that argument. So I think this is a good idea that we do this, obviously, but in terms of drilling down a little bit on how we control rent, and if we can subsidize that, or how we can do that with with some of this fund as well to look at that carefully. So I think the supervisor's absolutely right. That's the major, as you know.
Yep,
you
yeah.
know.
And the rehabilitation of properties, for rental purposes, things like that. This fund can be used for that as well.
That's good too.
One of the reasons why our communities are so desirable, because we have a strong sense of community, different people, different socioeconomic backgrounds. I mean, our communities, our little leagues, fire departments, ambulance corps, and this bill and this program can help keep a lot of those people here. I mean, when we walk down Main Street, you see people, you know people, they're going to the stores, people like that. So unfortunately, the market is actually making it difficult for those communities to exist, and that's one of the reasons why we have this law, and that's why we have home ownership as, you know, something as part of this bill or this program. So, you know, this is
Do
important
we
for
have,
us.
do you know of community housing funds in other areas or communities?
It's similar to something like this. I have not, in my research, I have not seen anything like this.
I'm pretty sure Nantucket has something.
Nantucket,
Mhm.
yeah.
Might want to look at that,
Yep.
but I think they have some sort of real estate transfer tax. It might be they have something similar to the Community Preservation Fund, but it, I think, has a percentage that goes toward housing.
Lake
Isn't that
Tahoe has
shared?
one?
I think that's shared though, right? Between
There's-
buyer and seller, it has some weird,
I don't know.
yeah.
Well, there are programs called shared equities that private banks actually employ in some of the higher-end communities where they actually own part of the home with the buyer, and that's something that we're looking at as well with this. And then they invest with the homeowner, and the homeowner could actually buy the bank out, or they can keep it, and when they sell, the bank gets their percentage back. Not just their money, the percentage, up or down. So there are other models that, you know, we've been looking at, and that's one of them.
Yeah. I like the idea of using some of the money in sort of that revolving way,
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, if, let's say somebody's trying to buy a house that they can't otherwise afford, and we're just tying up the money by taking an equity interest in the house, we don't see that money back until they sell the house, which could be 20 or 30, you know, years from now. Whereas if it's a low-interest loan, or, you know, we help somebody build an accessory apartment in their house, and we're able to collect some of that back as a percentage of the rent that the homeowner now is able to collect, we're able then to make that revenue that comes back available to helping spur another
Yeah.
affordable unit.
Or we can take a portion in the, an interest in the equity, so if somebody buys, you know, $800,000 house, and then, you know, 10 years from now, it's worth $1 million, the town takes a certain portion of that equity.
Right.
And that
Right.
comes back into the fund. And sometimes, the longer that the person does own the home, the more equity will be accumulated, and it's to our benefit as well. So there are other
So
different
this-
options.
Well, the plan itself will sort of outline some of the ways we'd use the money, and then the committee, the Affordable Housing Fund will then also,
Advisory group.
the advisory group will also help determine how we should target our money, what's the best bang for the buck, or,
Exactly,
it's not,
yes.
it just, you know, what's the most community acceptable
Right,
way to use the money. I think it's a combination.
right. Yes, exactly. So we have some time to work all of that out. You know, that we're going to outline some of these things in our plan, and then we have some time after, if this passes in November, this does not start until April, so we have some time to work out exactly how we're going to implement,
Year, okay.
you know, the funds.
Also, all money is generated, rent, equity, loans, either interest on a loan, all goes back into the fund, including the 0.5% annually. So
Correct.
it will be a funded program. So, and it could be a very strong one in a number of years.
Yeah, this is great. This is one of those pieces of legislation that we can sleep well at night knowing that we're doing something. You know, one of the difficulties I have is seeing the kids that have grown up around me and we've had locally and move away, including one of my own sons. And like Tommy John says, the character of this town is what keeps us going, and we hate to lose that. You know, so I'm really, with such a unique community, there's not one answer to our housing issue. There's so many. So I just want to make sure that we don't say, these are the three things we do, like we do with CPF, it's this, or this. Because we don't really know what the options down the road might be. You know, it could be down payment assistance, it could be rentals, it could be buying property for, you know, public investment, stuff like that. So there's a lot of options. So I just don't want to narrow it so much that we take away our flexibility.
It necessarily makes it forces you to do that, which is important. It's pretty complex, and in that, it's not quite like, you know, we have categories of land that we buy, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the legislation is broad, so there are a lot of things we can do with it. I do like the loans or the grant part to first-time home buyers because, you know, these first-time home buyers can go out and find their own home. And it can be anywhere within the town of Southampton. So it kind of spreads out where these homes will be, and then the town will give them either a grant or a loan to put towards that purchase. And it makes that home that was otherwise unaffordable now affordable for that
Which I
person.
think that is the number one priority on everything, because they're paying tremendous rents now.
Right.
And they could easily afford a mortgage payment. It's just paying that rent and putting away money for a down payment.
Exactly.
That's putting them, so that's
Yeah.
great.
Yep.
Although it's really
They're paying
interesting,
someone
the
else's
trend
mortgage.
is right now for young people, they don't want to own, you know, which I find interesting. And out here, you know, you're absolutely right, that, yeah, that's the biggest plate. We need to have people invested in the community to stay and to thrive. So, but there's also this trend where, you know, rents almost equal mortgages at some, in many cases.
More sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes more, so, yeah.
A lot more.
Well, I'm all for this, obviously, so let's
It
do it.
looks like there's a property tax provision here too. There's a little bit of a break
Yep,
for
exactly.
first-time home buyers on that at A4.
So Jim, in terms of, I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, I'll just put you on the spot though.
You got
You know,
three attorneys sitting over here now.
You know, assuming that we hold the public hearings and where the town board votes to put this on the ballot, to what extent can the town participate in a public education?
Advocating for it? I don't know that we're limited. I think this is.
I don't think we can tell people how to vote.
Well,
I think we could,
it's public information.
It's like the school budget.
Yes.
We did
We're
that
not-
for the
Yes,
water
but you can say
quality.
vote.
Yeah, yeah.
We did that for the water quality. We went out and talked and, you know, everything radio.
I don't know,
I'm
as
finding
individual
a lot of
board
people
members, if
don't
you're
know
not, if you're
about
not.
this.
Yeah,
So-
and explaining what the
To advocate
program
for it,
is
though.
not
So we would-
necessarily.
so
Feel that
we
it's a
could-
good thing.
Board, we
Yeah.
could-
so we could spend
individually
some
say,
money
yes.
then on public education. We could
Public
do,
education, sure, yeah.
Okay.
we could do a
Yes.
mailer.
Explaining the program
I
and,
mean, we hire outreach people to do outreach
Sure,
for the town
sure.
on various subjects, so.
and I'm not
You
sure
might
there's
wanna
anything
consider
limiting individual board members if you asked about it. You could,
No, I think
just
you
state your
can
opinion,
endorse
yeah.
it as an individual.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Say how you're planning on voting on it, encourage
Just
people. But I think taxpayer dollars can't promote the outcome, or only,
Right.
they can only be used to
Educate.
educate. So this is on the ballot, this is what it does, this is why the town is doing it. You just can't cross the line, I guess, into advocacy.
Right, correct.
So I would just ask the board, since I know all five of us are co-sponsoring this, is to maybe put some public funds into education. I don't know how much, maybe you could develop some kind of program, and we could talk to the controller, or maybe you have some housing funds available where we can say, we're going to take this amount and spend it, and here's how we're gonna spend it.
Right, okay.
Yeah, we have some funding sources for this in different ways, you know, engineering things that sometimes that we need to do, so there should be funding available to do that from different sources, not just.
I think a townwide mailer would be
Okay.
appropriate for this.
Yep, we've discussed doing a PowerPoint presentation, you know, things like that.
You
so.
could do a PSA.
You know,
Mhm.
You know,
It
what you need
It would
to
be
know
nice though if
about
that
the
mailer
housing
came out
referendum.
before all of the election mailers started.
Yeah, just like a Q&A, questions
people
and
are to the
answers
point where
about
they're
the
just
upcoming referendum on housing,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I know,
Nice question and answer
you
thing.
know?
I know Fred's office is working on a FAQ, so
Mhm.
we'll have that prepared as
Yeah.
well.
Okay.
So,
Good. Good.
And we know at least
It
East
just-
Hampton and us and probably possibly Southold.
Shelter Island. looks
And Shelter
like
Island.
They're working on it.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about
I'm
Riverhead.
not so sure yet about Southold or Riverhead.
Yeah, I don't think Riverhead. I'm not
I
sure.
spoke to Southold, they're in the very beginning stages.
Yeah, I've spoke with some folks over there too.
Mhm.
Riverhead was more, I said, they have issues with SCP.
They have some, yeah, they're,
Already, and they have a little
So
bit more affordable.
I think
It's a
we're
little
the
more
the
affordable
leader
community to
here. I
start
think
with.
we've started the process now. I don't think anybody has gotten as far as we have at this point.
Mhm.
Right, well, we have the plan.
Yes. we
Right.
do.
Now, does that plan have to be adopted before we schedule?
No.
No, it does
Hearing.
not. It just, the plan has to be in place before any of the money can be spent. So, but I think it's helpful to have the plan so that people know when
Mhm.
they're voting on this, what we intend to spend the money on. You know, what our number one goal is, you know, number 2, 3, 4, so on. So I think it would be helpful to at least have the plan out there. You don't have to adopt it before November.
Well, we could if we wanted to.
Sure can, yep.
If we feel like we're ready to. I know you've done a lot of work on it.
Yeah,
but there is an impact if, you know, God forbid the referendum fails, there is an impact on that plan that needs to be revised to reflect the failure of the referendum.
Not so
Well-
much. There's a lot in it that we could do anyway. It's just
Yeah,
kind of a
I'm
supplement
saying it
of
needs
our
to be
comprehensive
revised,
plan.
because we talk a lot about the fund and using those, how to use those funds.
Yeah, but the language in it is if the funds are approved.
Yes.
So, are we having a separate meeting about the VHB plan?
yes. I'm going to have another work session with you and then public hearing and so on for
So
that.
there will be public hearing on the housing plan too.
Correct, yeah.
So, okay.
So it's going to run concurrent this springtime? kind
Yes,
of,
yep.
This particular piece of code and then the housing plan?
Yeah,
Okay.
but we
Yeah.
wanted to get this before you first because we do have
Right.
that August 8th deadline. So we wanted to make sure that we meet that and get this done, and then we will have the,
Right.
The
Yeah,
two
this is a
concepts will
this
merge.
is a priority.
I mean, they
It
did
is.
today, they're going to in, you know,
But to
our
do it concurrently,
subsequent
I
meetings.
think is
It
a
doesn't,
good
it
idea,
doesn't
too.
hurt, but it just,
You mean
you
it's
know,
not
it's going to take a
required?
natural,
But in the interest
This
of
is
transparency, I
what's
think
gonna-
that, you know, educate the public in terms of how we intend to use the money if they approve this, I think is important.
So do
Yeah.
both,
And that
both the
detail is
same
in that housing plan.
meetings?
that's right, yeah.
I just don't know if you're gonna do it at the same meeting, or it's gonna get convoluted as to what we're discussing.
It's a good point, too.
No, but that's gonna take
I-
over the question and answer session, so we have to be
Yeah.
able to say what we're
Gonna
gonna be
happen.
doing it on.
Yeah, I'd like to be able to distribute that plan.
I would like to do them together, if possible.
well, I would have the work session, see, you know, what's being discussed and what's in that plan. I think that'll inform that kind of decision, because I think it's easy to separate them in a, you know, in a single conversation, but
I think the plan is just like an expansion of
Mhm.
this.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
64 pages, you know, the research,
And it's a
the
lot,
goals is really,
good.
you know, what we want to look at here, you know, the goals.
So I mean, it's gonna raise
town.
a lot of the same questions, and it's gonna answer a lot of the questions.
Mhm.
yeah,
Okay.
well, that's the hope.
I think so. I think we can sort of
The
have
sooner
them
we get that
concurrent.
out, better.
Okay.
Okay.
Just both moving forward at their, whatever pace makes sense, when the board's comfortable with adopting the plan after we've had a public vetting of it. We can potentially adopt the plan before we adopt the resolution to
Yes.
put it on the ballot.
Yes, you can.
That could happen.
We do have a couple of options, you know, how that evolves, I think is,
All right.
I think it starts from the work session, to be
And-
honest with you.
Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thanks, that's a
Thank you.
lot,
Thank you.
really good, good stuff.
All right, our next, the next thing is 11:15.
Coffee break.
So we can hold off on that because we're actually ahead of schedule. Any quick updates? We don't put updates on
yeah,
it.
I wasn't
I know-
there for
I know
updates.
Councilwoman McNamara and I went to an Eagle Scout ceremony with Ethan Gates, I
Yep.
think was his name. Impressive young man who got made Eagle Scout over the weekend at the Basilica in Southampton. Beautiful cathedral there. And, you know, he was well attended and he spoke very well, and it's just an impressive young man. We know how hard it is to achieve Eagle Scout. I think he had 35 merit badges. His grandfather, I think, was a village police officer, right? Or his
Grandfather and father.
and father both worked in village PD, and his Eagle Scout project was something for the village police department.
He was refurbishing the range that his grandfather built.
Right. So, yeah, it was really nice. I'm glad. And I presented a proclamation on behalf of the town with all of your signatures on it. And other than that, I really don't have any particular updates. Oh, Janice is passing me updates. All right, all right, the town submitted a request for infrastructure funding projects from both Senator Schumer and Congressman Zeldin in order to be included into the federal infrastructure funding allocations. The project that was submitted to both elected officials was for the elevation of the western portion of Dune Road to mitigate flooding. The cost is $1.5 million. So Ponquag Bridge to the Shinnecock Inlet, that area was not raised like the Ponquag Bridge to the village of Quogue boundary. So the idea would, in that area, is flood so bad. So just to be able to raise that road up to allow vehicles to pass at a typical high tide. And it's tough with the storm high tides, but just to get it to the same elevation as the rest of the road. And something that I've been in discussions with the highway superintendent about. It's a priority project, and since they have infrastructure money available, might as well make the request.
State budget has a lot of infrastructure money.
Exactly. Any other updates?
I went to a League of Women Voters event. It was running and winning, and it was for 11th and 12th grade high school girls. It was,
We could start now.
I'm
We're a
listening.
little bit ahead, but we might recess for a few minutes. Well, go ahead.
it was a great event. There was quite a few elected officials there, females, that was able to speak to the girls about participating in government, and there were questions raised about, we can't even vote yet. How do we get our voices heard? And I said the one thing that I could recommend to them, because we all sat around a table and we discussed things. And when you ask 11th and 12th graders, as far as being in government, what's the most important thing to you living here? Housing. And they all want to stay here and they all want to live here. And I told them, I said, you can't vote, but you can speak. And I said, when we have public hearings on affordable housing units and the such, I said, come speak. Let people know that this is a real issue for you and you want to stay here. And it changes the tone of the conversation when you have young people come out and say, this is an issue for me, this affects me, versus just hearing, the no, 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 no. When you put a face to what you're trying to help and save, it makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
And the girls were great, and Minerva Perez was there. She was the speaker, because the basis of it was diversity in voting. And the girls all had to come up with a project to go back to their schools, and they were making a poster, and they were coming up with a campaign to register people to vote. And it was funny, because at the end of the thing, they mixed all the girls up, so there was 5 girls, but they were all from different schools. And so they had this poster board, and so they started the project as we were leaving, and I looked at the table and I said, so they gave you this poster board, and you're gonna come up with a campaign for your school? And they said, yeah. And I said, and there's 5 of you from 5 different schools? And they go, yeah. And I said, welcome to government. So it was good. It was really great. It was good to connect with young people, and I hope they do it again, because it was a good thing.
Other updates?
That's a good one. That's an annual.
Just a quick one that happened a little while ago. We had a joint meeting between the Anti-Bias Task Force and the Affirmative Action Task Force. That was a really good thing to see happen, talking about diversity in hiring, which I think is a big deal, and then trying
Doing
to
updates.
get these two organizations to work well together. So I'll stop here. I just got Cindy.
Well, that's okay. You know, we're still 2 minutes ahead of schedule here. Any other updates?
Yeah,
John?
I do. Suffolk County had a public hearing on reimagining transit. They are looking at their bus systems. Most of the changes were west and particularly to the north. But out in East Hampton, they are expanding, Suffolk County is expanding their on-demand transit program. They ran a pilot program between Sag Harbor and here in Southampton Village, even though we're the town, but between Southampton and Sag Harbor, and that has met with success. I asked them to include Bridgehampton, Watermill, and that kind of infill area. I think the on-demand transit system could be utilized efficiently along with our South Fork commuter connection, and that's what I told them. So I hope they do that. But they are expanding it in East Hampton to Montauk, so.
It would be nice to see it we have nothing between Hampton Bays right now and West Hampton. So
Right.
it would be
Right.
nice to see
That's
that.
Right, the
big issue,
S92 comes down from
They-
River
they-
into Hampton Bays,
Into
but
Hampton
then
Bays, but
here,
nothing
but,
between Hampton Bays and
Yeah.
West Hampton.
Good.
well, trying to move people over the canal, you know, on the train track, that's what I was that was the ask that I had for them.
Well, you have, what happened in West Hampton, though, is you have a big parking lot that's used to wait for a train that only goes twice a day, west or east of West Hampton, so it becomes an issue. And I know they've been talking about the spur to connect the center line to that, so, but yeah, very good point. It affects people west of the canal just as much as east of the canal.
So I thought that was promising. We also had a youth court graduation, Councilwoman McNamara, myself went. That was fantastic. Good to see that up and running. We had a beach grass restoration on Long Beach about 2 weeks ago. Councilman Martell was there, planted beach grass in areas of Long Beach where, you know, there was no grass, and part of a beach reclamation project. Sand blows up on the beach. It's actually creating a little berm on the other side. The beach grass will hold the grass in place, and it's natural. And there's more things, so I'll leave that to you.
Two quick ones. We do, on April 23rd and 24th, we do are sponsoring the Great East End Cleanup, so if you haven't already signed up, do so on our website. And on April 30th, I will be at Good Ground Park. Tommy John will be at the Nathaniel Rogers House, and we'll be handing out seedlings, native species, to give away free to anybody who wants to come by and do some restoration themselves.
That's great. Then we can do more updates after this item. So let's switch then to our 11:15 item, which is land leases for wireless infrastructure. We're joined by Janice Shearer, our Town Planning and Development Administrator, Len Marchese, our Town Controller, Glenn Schnabel, our Senior Management Analyst. And Janice, I'll let you introduce this.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Supervisor, members of the board. Thanks for having us this morning. We're still talking about infrastructure. It's 2022, and I'm here to tell you that we do not have adequate cell service infrastructure in our town, which is no surprise to anyone. So we're still trying to formulate long-term plans to accommodate cellular wireless infrastructure. So the first thing is we did have a master plan done way back, but it's still relevant. And one of the main recommendations was to come up with opportunities to use town-owned lands and rights of way, because when you're the landlord, you have even more control over even, you know, someone else's planning board application on a private piece of property due to the way FCC rules and things like that work with the shot clock. And it's very interesting how much, you know, the cell towers at this point have really positioned themselves, and rightly so, as infrastructure like water mains and roadways, and these are necessary evils and they're not evil, right? We all have a cell phone, we all need it. So
Also revenue potentially for the
and it is, and the idea is that we can be the landlord, we can control the, you know, siting, the design, how it looks and feels, but we should be the ones saying these are the sites that we want it on. let's do it here. Versus just sort of, oh, they're putting a tower here, and everyone's reacting. But you are actually in control, and you don't have to be reacting. You can react by saying, these are the places where we want it. These are public assets then, will generate revenue for the public to defray those costs, and will provide a necessary service. So,
Janet,
It appears that there's like a new generation of cell towers that are going up that are very different from the early days of cell towers, where they were putting these lattice structures high up in the air. Now it seems like you don't even notice them. They're these, they look like flagpoles, and everything's on the inside. The one just went up in Watermill, and no, I haven't heard a single complaint about it. You wouldn't even know it's a cell tower. It's a little bit above the trees, but it looks like a white pole. So is that sort of what we're talking about?
yes,
Those types of
unipole, they're
structures?
called unipoles or monopoles, and that's where all the antennas are contained into what is called a canister. And then, depending on the height of the canister, they take about 10 feet increments. And those increments are where the,
So in a
depending on
sense,
where
though,
you are.
because of that, you have to do maybe more of them because they're not as high, but they're
Yes.
less objectionable.
So,
And
and I
it's a
wanted to
distributed
cover
network,
that,
which-
in a
Janice?
distributed network.
Now, before we move off of this, but go on.
I was just gonna say that in the wireless master plan, the thought then was, we don't want, just one gigantic cell phone. We're willing to accept more but lower. That was at that time, that board. You're a different board now. Is that still what you wanna
I'd
see?
say so because.
More but less, height.
300-foot towers are just, people, nobody wants them anywhere near
Right.
them. and they
Except
stick
for
out.
emergencies, obviously, and I just wanted to make this one last
Right.
point.
Emergency communications
It
may be
it has to be
different.
a line of sight. for
Emergency
those-
stuff,
for the
800
emergency
megahertz
stuff,
does.
yeah.
I was speaking to a planner who dealt with the, in Paradise, California, the wildfires that burned down the entire town. And the first thing they lost was all telephone communications, wireless communications, and the only thing they had was the emergency tower. People died in their cars because they couldn't get the notifications that the roads were closed. And it's a serious thing that we need to make sure that we always have the emergency tower, and where, at any cost, that we'll have to figure that out at some point. But this is more about the smaller unipole ones that we can put on, say, a highway department yard. We've talked about this in one of the locations, or the North Sea Transfer Station, or the commercial dock, or these kinds of places that they're not really next to anyone and they're not gonna hurt anyone. So this is at least a starting point of this conversation, but we need to do it. We can't
Right.
just keep talking about it.
Now,
So.
the town is not necessarily obligated to do this.
No.
And if we do not, say, we don't put any poles up, private individuals can.
Yes.
And that is what has been happening, is that on private lots and parcels, that they've been putting up some cell towers, and they're getting the revenue from these cell towers. It's not like the town has to do this. We can, we would do it because, one, it's an amenity, it's infrastructure, and two, it's a revenue generator. But if we do not, Verizon and other companies will probably seek out private individuals to put poles on their property.
100%,
And
and they
they'll
do,
go
in
to the
fact, they
planning
call
board.
us first, and they say, what lands can we do it on? And we say, we don't really know, and then they go, okay, we're gonna pursue private.
Okay, well, that's good I think for the public to understand, is that, if we don't do it, then private individuals most likely will.
Yeah, but our
100%.
sites are probably much better.
I agree with you
for-
100%. I just don't
No,
want
no,
people to
yeah,
think
well,
that we're shoving
right,
it
so
down
we
their
have sort of
throats.
the critical pieces that
Yeah.
are in the woods that aren't near anybody, that have better setbacks, and also,
They have hills on
yeah,
them.
private companies do it, they get the revenue.
Mhm.
If the town does it, the public gets the revenue, in a sense of, we're able to keep taxes lower.
Right.
And the technology supports being more hidden and less obtrusive than ever before. So I think this is gonna be less and less of a problem.
They always do ask to be above the tree line, and then we, say no, we kind of get them down, and then they have the ability to incrementally go up 20
They
more
have to be
feet.
somewhat above the tree line.
So there has
Right.
to be some kind of,
Well, if it's a
give and take
5G
here.
network, then you need one for a really great distribution. That's how that's set up right now. So it's going to be more of these
Small.
pods, basically, that are fed by you know, that's the trend that communications are taking right now.
Right, so
So
we
the
were
village is
supposed to
Sag Harbor.
develop recommendations, we've been to, you know, create these locations that are suitable, and we don't know that because we've never issued RFPs or done anything along this line, and so we're coming to you saying we want to put out an RFP and ask you, you know, to at least entertain it, so we could see what people come back with, and you're still in the driver's seat. You could still say, you know, I don't want it here, or this doesn't make sense.
Which properties would you like to include in the RFP?
I think first and foremost, you know, we've been talking about the North Sea Transfer Station as a property that, you know, we'll keep it away from SYS, we'll keep it, but we're talking about solar at the landfill. We don't want to interfere with that, but there's plenty of spots where a small tower will not interfere with anything there.
We had it on our last agenda for the Leonard property, which is
Yeah,
close to
the
that.
Leonard property is more like a long-term plan, like, it's not that we're really looking to put anything there, but if you don't buy it that way now, in 30 years, they're gonna go, well, we can't.
But there was a question on that at the
Oh,
North
yeah.
Sea CAC, they brought this up, and they had asked if, because I think it was a 10,000 square foot area, they were asking if the fall radius needed to be included in that 10,000 square foot area.
It doesn't, because all around it is vacant, unplatted lands.
And that's what I,
And I meant to tell you that. I'm
that's what I
sorry.
told them I, you know, was gonna
Yeah,
find out.
so
but-
no,
Everything around it,
yeah, but that is like, that's a smart way to do things when you're buying, you know, because we end up having to undo certain things that later on we realize, like,
Just providing an option.
you know, we're providing an option in a
You
long-term
won't have the
setting.
alienation issue, I'm sorry.
Well, we've also been looking at properties for alternative energy siting and things
Right.
like North Sea and those areas. We have quite a few areas that are brownfield sites that require remediation. Some of those, just the way we talk about with developers, that pay for that remediation in order to be able to use that
Right, that's
in
coming
conjunction
up
with
too.
that kind of thing. And if we overlaid that with communications companies that say this is good, this is bad, or have them look at that to see what works and what doesn't, then we basically have a roadmap to do exactly what you're proposing to do.
Yes, and we did build into our wireless code avoidance areas and opportunity areas. So the opportunity areas are these kinds of, you know, like a highway yard, a landfill, another, like the commercial dock, let's say, but I don't know if that's suitable or anything, you know, because of the water. But I'm just saying, like, those kinds of like more commercial, industrial types of uses would be suitable for a, you know, monopole.
Again, these things look like flagpoles. And
Right.
So like the North Sea Transfer Station already has a flagpole. It's not
Right.
gonna be much different.
I mean, they're
All I could-
more
Yeah, I mean.
wider
Or they could
diameter.
incorporate this into the flagpole somehow and put a flag on it or something, I don't know.
They're usually looking for a minimum of 100 feet. You know, I'm not gonna like lie. It's definitely at least 100,
It's
more like
taller than a
120.
normal
They
flag.
all come in with, you know, 150 and we beat them down to, you know, a lesser height. But in the end, they're only just trying to communicate with the other towers above the tree line. So that's what's taking place, and we certainly don't want to compromise any of our important resources. But at the same time, we have to have a cellular network connection.
So can
Our
you tell us the properties you want in the RFP? So you mentioned the North Sea Transfer Station.
I did mention North Sea Transfer Station and the commercial dock. I know that we did have conversations about Club Lane. There was some opposition, but it is a real dead zone up there in Noyak. And at least if you could,
Not according to the people who live there.
right. So that's really comes down to, you know, what you want to do now or later. So that could be in or out. That is a
So isn't
site
there-
that has been identified by multiple
Will that still
carriers.
be needed if the village is looking to build a cell tower at the transfer station?
That's in Sag Harbor.
Does it,
Area.
it's close to
It's-
this though,
well,
does it?
It's in unincorporated Southampton
Right.
town. It's
Will
owned by
that-
the village.
If that
It's a
happens,
parcel.
would we still need a tower, or would that cover the gaps in coverage in terms of
I'm not
that
sure.
Noyak area?
Potentially, and that is, you know, a contested application at the planning board level, but I would say that they are trying to also generate revenue and do it at their land, highway
I know
type.
some people-
So it makes sense what they're trying to do.
There were some
If they
people
can overcome the other
who
issues.
did object last time we considered Club Lane, though I'm not sure they understood this is basically this flagpole type of structure that I think if it were up, it would not be objectionable, though people always get worried about EMF and things like that, but they would be very far from any home.
I'm willing to put it out there, but I don't want anyone to think we're trying to force it on anyone. We're just trying to see what we get back in terms of proposals.
Now, one of the questions when we discussed this last
We're
time
not
was,
obligated if we do a proposal to accept the proposal.
No, you're not.
Okay.
okay, what was the contract that we have that was put in place years ago?
Yes.
And every time we build something, it resets the timing of the contract.
Well,
Is-
yeah, we're trying to work that out, and the other thing is that we can still do the RFP outside of that, and they would have like the right of first refusal,
Possibly.
potentially, but that's, a legal issue, but
We'd worry about that after we got the proposals back.
we'll see what we get back and
Okay.
what they're.
They might
what-
not be willing to match what the proposals
Right,
are.
right, exactly.
Well, after they hear this work session, they
No,
Because we're
I
not
don't think
issuing an
they would
RFP
work.
just to get information. I mean, that's a large part of
So,
it, but
yeah, so currently I'm trying to review the potential town-owned properties that are appropriate for wireless. So is Club Lane appropriate for wireless? Yes. Does everyone like it? No. So that would be,
So would we have a hearing at each location? How would that work?
so you could absolutely do the RFP, see what you get back, and then have a public hearing about it. And say, which one do we want to choose to move forward? And we should do this throughout this is just the first batch, but are we gonna do this anywhere else? I'm just trying to plan ahead, how we're gonna, accomplish something, because otherwise it's just gonna be the same old thing, and we're not gonna get
We wanted
anywhere.
to do something out on the Barrier Island. I mean, we were gonna do it at the Ponquag Pavilion, but we didn't, the gazebo or whatever, the top was not big enough to handle it, so putting something at the commercial dock would
Right.
be,
I'm not
That could be
I
a
couldn't even get a
flagpole.
windmill at
Yeah.
at
Sure you
Diana.
can.
because it's parkland,
It's considered parkland, if I
Yeah.
recall.
Yeah,
but it's town parkland, so we can't put it on a town park.
probably
I don't know,
not.
Jim, I guess you can do cell
working
towers on
dock.
parkland. Is it considered alienation, or do we need to go through the state on that? I don't think you'd have any problem getting
It's a commercial
approval.
fishing dock.
Commercial
so
dock is
commercial-
parkland?
I
Right.
remember though when we
Well,
got
it
it
is.
from the county,
There's electricity
Ponquag.
out there.
Wait,
They
we're
had
switching
to,
the subject.
they had to
Had to
get,
alienate
they had to
it,
get state
to transfer it to
legislation
us.
to, right, to get the alienation for the transfer to us from them to us, so.
We don't even know if that's even necessarily the spot, so, but the
Yeah,
whole point of the RFP is to say, carriers, do some propagation studies, tell us the dead zones, here's our properties that we're willing to entertain, and come back with a proposal. That's what we're asking to find out. And then you assess those proposals, hear from the public, and then move forward. So it's
And then
not,
we overlay
you're
that.
not jumping over and making a decision today. We're just trying to get to a point where we even know what we're talking about.
And
some
we
of those
overlay
areas, they
that
might
over.
come back and say,
Okay.
it's not gonna work.
Right.
Yeah,
So that's what
it's just
we're
the
asking.
learning curve that we have to
so
get.
you want to do a resolution, you want one of us to introduce a resolution to issue an RFP. I think it's important that you, in full disclosure, tell us what sites are on that RFP. So you have the commercial dock, Club Lane.
We were gonna do
Transfer
the-
station,
Yeah,
North Sea Transfer Station, any others?
that was it, right now,
Those
today.
three.
See, frankly, I'd rather do it across the town of Southampton to
Mm-hmm.
get their site information so that we have a bigger picture.
Okay,
than-
so
rather
do you
than
want me
one
to come
area.
up with like a list of like 10 or something?
Yeah, and
Alright.
Do it.
distributed,
Other properties that we own that can actually have a cell
I feel
tower
we
on
should
them.
Yeah.
I feel we should just go, if that's your recommendation, those three, let's get those three in motion, let's get some bids to entertain. We'll see if we have the issue Tommy John raised.
With the contract.
Yeah, and it just, we'll see what the reaction on Club Lane is. I
Well, we
wish.
kinda know.
We know what that reaction is.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I think you know.
I mean,
I
I'm not
know-
laughing
maybe,
off, there
but
were
we could
50
do
people
some
out there,
visuals, we could
just
do
after a meeting.
the balloon thing. I just really, I
But we
wish,
don't know what we don't know right now.
I wish somebody
That's-
could develop like a mock pole, like a fiberglass version of one of those poles, so you can see
So you
exactly.
just take a picture of one and,
Basically just.
They do, they photo
Yeah,
render it.
they render
do
it right
render, So
in.
we
Yeah.
can
I
ask
know,
for
but
that.
Complete with
if you actually
shadows
put a
and-
dummy pole in place, people can actually see that's exactly what it's gonna look like from
And
my
where
home.
exactly the
Janice,
location is.
on private properties, applications are not allowed to take in health considerations for monopoles. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's-
We're
I mean-
precluded by federal FCC law.
Right, and the reason why we take it into consideration, because we're the government and we listen to our constituents, and that's concerns that they have. I mean,
We do, but it
if
doesn't
it's a
influence
private
the
individual,
review.
they don't necessarily, they're not allowed to, they're preempted by
Even
the
us,
federal
but
government.
we are too.
Right.
So even if it was on, that's just not part of our review. The
Right.
EMFs
It can't be considered.
are not.
Okay, I
part
mean,
of
that's
the review.
one of the concerns that people have, that, you know, there's a belief that these are not healthy. So,
Right.
Right. Some people
So
think
if a-
that cell phones are.
so my point is, if there's a
Sure.
private individual that owns a piece of land right next to every single one that we are considering, they could put a monopole up and they don't have to take health considerations into account in
That's
any way,
right.
shape, or form. Okay.
It's pretty much exempt from the federal,
Right.
the
But
FCC has
because
done
this
this
is
health
town
studies.
property and we are the town board.
So, yeah,
I
you'd be the
understand.
landlord, so you have a
from-
little bit more
In terms of making your
control.
decision, if you feel that's a factor in making a decision, you could take that into account in your vote.
Right, but in the proper purview under the planning board, and when we adopted our regulations, one of the things, wasn't able to be, because they're saying if the antenna meets the FCC requirements, then we can't say that
Right.
it doesn't. It can't be approved for that reason. We have all the other reasons, but not that reason.
Are there any private applications in the town now for monopole?
Well,
No, the
it's
one
at
up in
the
Waterville.
one in,
Sag Harbor.
Sag Harbor. at
By the
the,
village of
transfer
Sag Harbor,
station.
yeah.
at
And
And the one in
That
Watermill is
is
up.
highway.
That's up already.
That's up.
One is
one in
Watermill
Watermill's
is up, and
done,
I haven't
yeah.
heard a single objection
No.
to it.
No.
It's- most
I mean,
people
it's
don't even know
kind of
there.
like, it's definitely noticeable, but it's not,
But not in a negative way. It's just a white pole.
It's all in the eye.
I think everyone's
of the
becoming more
great.
used to the
Yeah,
fact that these
kind of
things are
benign.
here. I mean, you're gonna like,
I haven't heard one complaint about that pole in Watermill,
Well, you will now.
but go ahead. If you
Now that
have a
people know what it
problem,
is.
Let me know, but I could tell you, including in that Watermill area, I've had a number of complaints prior to that about cell service being bad. And a lot of people, particularly during the pandemic, people were using cellular for data more than, normal, and we had a lot more people out here. I got so many complaints about bad cell service, because you drop calls, you can't drive from here to East Hampton without dropping service several times.
Can't drive down Hill Street without losing.
Yeah, Hill Street, you drop calls. I mean, there's a number of places, North Sea, you drop calls.
I think it's an-
frustrating to people, and if, God forbid, you had to call 911 in an emergency and you didn't have the signal. That to me is more important than some, minor aesthetic concerns that people might have, particularly knowing that the structures are inside the pole, the poles that are up are not, visually objectionable, but not being able to get an ambulance when you need one, that is a serious concern. So I think we have to make a judgment call here and figure out what's the best thing for the public.
I think it's a
Those
good
things,
point,
that's-
Jay, and I think that's a good example of a private individual putting a pole up on their property and getting permits, and it's in part because the town is not necessarily acting, and I'm not saying it's a bad or, good, bad, or indifferent. If we don't, others will, and health and safety cannot be taken into consideration in those applications. And what you say about coverage is correct.
Well, and also, and it's not really just the dollars thing, but
No.
a typical tower could generate $100,000 a year for the town. And, may not sound like a lot of money, but, it does help keep property taxes from going up. And that is a benefit that everybody then enjoys if we can keep property taxes from going up. So those non-tax revenues help us comply with the cap, New York State cap. They help keep our property taxes low, and they also solve this, it's kind of a quality of life issue when you can't make a call. So there
Well,
are
and
some
you're-
compelling reasons.
You're
to-
seeing the same thing with alternative energy siting too, where you're getting private people involved in recognizing that there's revenue there that we won't benefit from because it's on private property. In some cases it makes sense, in other cases it doesn't, where we have the trade-off to remediate some of these properties, which can be prohibitively expensive,
Right.
and we have to pay for it. If they offset that cost, that's a good deal, because then we get revenue, we get you know, we get the fixing of the site, the remediation of that site. But how many of those sites we have, how that lines up with where cell towers are required, or what should I call them, cell flagpoles?
Yeah,
Cell flagpoles, where they're,
Monopoles.
monopoles, where they're required. And, you know, it's not just limited to one part of the town. That's why I want to make the point that, you know, ultimately, we're gonna have to look broader, as we're doing right now with alternative energy siting,
I agree.
where you can actually generate the cost of electricity to operate the systems, and then it becomes
Sustainable.
sustainable totally.
Yeah,
So-
and also, in terms of the separate issue of emergency communications, we are still trying to go on to that 800 megahertz channel that will require multiple sites just for emergency communications, and that is something like, in terms of like long-term planning, that is a conversation that should be ongoing, and making sure that we secure wherever those, line of sight, you know, for the, for that type of channel, you know, that's different.
And they're
than-
They're
grid
much
independent.
taller, right?
They're taller
Much taller.
and different.
But you don't need, you know,
You only need one,
you only need one,
but
Right.
they have to be much taller.
yeah.
But that's a separate and apart from this right now, but I just want to keep it in the consciousness here that that's probably the most important
I
thing.
mean, I think
Well,
that's
but-
something that we need to plan for now.
Yes.
But
yes.
also to plan for storms and things like that when we lose the grid, where you want to keep that network operating. It's also, these renewable sites are part of that. You know, that's how we envision that to be, as part of that, and being able to power those. So if we don't do microgrids, at least we're able to power those systems if they're on site there. If they're linked into the grid with microgrids, which is something I think is part of this that we need to talk about at some point.
Usually those cell tower sites, you supply them with generator systems.
Yeah, they have
too.
backup generators,
Yeah,
but they're
but it's a fossil fuel generator,
Yeah,
and
no,
it
you're right.
only lasts so long.
No,
So
that's true.
battery backups are, you
Yeah.
know, and then
They-
having that
They're
redundancy
all
is a
automatic,
good thing. Yeah. Great.
All right, any other questions? Or can we give Janice some direction? I prefer going ahead and doing the RFP for these 3 sites,
right.
and allowing that to move forward. If, while you're doing that, you want to review the rest of the town and come up with more, we can add it to the RFP, or we can do a separate RFP for additional sites, but
Yeah, I think this is kind of an ongoing effort, you know, where we'll start here, see what you get back. We may perfect the process. We may say, you know, the things we're asking for, the industry might say, we can give you this and that, but, you know, other things you want to know,
and
you know, I don't know what we're going to get.
There'll be pushback on all 3 sites, particularly, I think, the Club Lane and the North Sea Transfer Station. You know, I'm certainly willing to sit down with property owners that live in somewhere, you know, near it, or are concerned about any of these issues, and I'm sure you are too.
Of course.
We can try to address those things, and I think being able to show exactly how tall and what it would look like will help. I think address 90% of the concerns, because I think that the initial fear is gonna be one of those giant lattice structures with lights blinking and, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
changing the
We're not talking about that.
skyline. That is not what we're talking about, and as people get the facts, I think, there'll still be some objections, but I think there'll be far fewer. And then we'll just have to decide whether to move forward or not.
Okay.
Well,
Is that-
I would like to see the broader picture, maybe,
Okay.
you know, with Supervisor, I agree that maybe it's another RFP, but, and I think to Councilman Schiavone's point is that you're gonna learn something very quickly with this, with our current contract, and that should inform maybe the second RFP if we go ahead and do that. But, you know, I don't like issuing RFPs just to learn something.
Well,
you
we
know.
do know we have gaps, and Tommy John was questioning whether we have one up in the Noyak area, or,
There have been proposals though, too,
but
in these
I,
areas.
I,
Yeah,
Just a
yeah.
random
I
throw.
know.
No,
anecdotally,
But we have the same
I know,
issue.
I know I drop calls all the time in North Sea. I know that's a bad spot. We haven't done, maybe we have done an RF study town-wide to see where the holes in service are. That would sort of inform where we need locations. You know, I feel like the industry ought to be telling us that. They have come and said that North Sea transfer station is a good site. The Club Lane, several providers have eyed that site, so I'm assuming they need.
Yeah, that's why we're saying these sites.
They
because
need it
They've
there.
identified, and when I say they, it is like at least more than 10 different. And so it's not fair to engage in one, we have to do it fairly across the board, although we have another, contract that we'll have to figure out, but they have the right of first refusal, meaning we want to see
Might
what the
have.
offers are. They may have, but we want to see what's on offer because our structure with them is from
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
I would like to see where we need those 800 megahertz taller, more objectional towers are gonna be.
Okay. We're going to work with the chief and Motorola guys about that.
I mean,
and
that's
sort of,
something, I mean,
Right.
that's
If they could
important.
be put right next to those giant transmission towers that
I-
look like that, going into Riverhead, up to the county center, that,
That 800 megahertz system is, that is sort of state of the art in what people are using, but I don't know 20 years from now that is going to be the system, that it may switch to satellite systems where they're bouncing from the ground up to satellites and back, in which case you won't even see, those giant towers won't even be there maybe 20 years from now.
but, I mean, that's
Just like
something though.
when I grew up, we had an antenna on our house, every house had an antenna,
The 800 system is the preferred system for our emergency responders, our fire departments, ambulance. It's also used by the
That's more-
county, and there are areas of the east end that cannot communicate with the county because we don't have the 800 coverage
That's more
because of our
important to me than
Well,
infrastructure.
The county sort of needs to lead that 800 megahertz conversation and figure out where they need the structures, I think.
It's-
Well,
I
there are
think
members
we
of our
need to
department
just-
who
in
wonder
terms of
why they were
long-term planning.
required to have the
That's
800
all-
radios,
that's all
but they
on
don't
the
have the.
site, And
yeah,
that's
that's why it's a
300-foot
problem.
towers and they're.
I want to make sure we keep them kind of separate because one is really for revenue and for cell service.
Right.
And the other one is communication channels for our first responders.
That's
So
more
they
important
are
than
very
drop the
separate
call.
issues. Yeah.
And they should be separate.
Yeah,
so
but
one
at the
doesn't
same time,
impact
when
the
we're,
other.
when we're, buying CPF property at a high point, 20 years from now, someone's gonna say, good thing they thought of that. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
we won't be here
Good
to say.
planning, right?
It's,
I
yes.
will be.
So, I mean, we may not be sitting here, we'll probably be alive still,
You'll
but I'm
be
just
watching
saying.
the show.
Yeah, I'll be watching it on CTV.
If you can get a signal.
Charles will still be in the.
All right, so,
I'm sorry, CTV?
Yeah,
I'm going to be watching it on my implant.
yeah, you're watching your implant.
Metaverse stuff, man.
so I'm not clear we're all on board, but I think I'd like to move forward with the do the RFP and I'll take my lumps a little bit. We'll see how it goes.
Let's start with the basic three
Okay.
and go from there.
Okay. Great.
But I'm with Councilman Booby, I want to know town-wide
Picture.
what we're looking at.
Great. Okay, good.
But are you willing to move forward with potentially with an RFP for knowing the entire town picture?
No, well, yeah, do the three, definitely, because like you said, that'll point up
We
different.
do have a wireless master plan showing every sale site in the town also, and I'll send you all the link to that.
Yeah,
It's on our
but we need to
website.
overlay that over the
gap.
ones
Over
that
the
are outside of that
gaps.
scope, because what we looked at with energy siting is a little different.
And we have been
And that
working with
identifies
Ross
hookups, by
to
the
kind of
way.
do that. So
Interconnect.
we'll have an updated map for you.
One of those companies, I think, put together a list of like 6 town-owned properties that they were interested in. I don't know.
They, most of them were open space or CPF.
Yeah,
So they were out.
They aren't
Yeah.
knowledgeable enough to be able to pick that up. That
Due
was part-
diligence.
Right, and that's why I printed out the recommendation, which was,
Mm-hmm.
actually figure it out internally. We tell, they're like, how about here, how about there, how about there? And we're like, no, no, no. Instead, we could do like, these sites are the ones that are
Yeah.
potentially okay with us. Let's see what you could propose, and then we'll see if we like it. We're still not sure.
Yeah,
So
let's
In
stop
addition-
pushing the cart, let's pull
Yeah.
it.
In
Right.
addition to the tower that the Village of Sag Harbor wants to put in on Bridgehampton Sag Harbor Turnpike, there's also a radio station in the village that has a pre-existing tower, and they are looking to maybe make that a model pole, not without its challenges there as well. I mean,
Initially, and I am the last person that wants to, compromise anyone's safety or health or the environment, but at the same time, like, you have to acknowledge, we all do, that, this is part of life. We're just living it. Like, we have to have, this is the technology. We all have a phone. So we all have to figure out, unless you don't have a cell phone and you don't use it, it's kind of hard to say you don't want it here. So, but how can we do it in the most sensitive way possible? Yes. So,
Until they get replaced by some implant.
the telepathic thing, that would be the
It's
best
like what
bet.
Janet said earlier, is to keep them lower and less objectionable, we need to do more, right? That's the thing, because there's sort of this radius based on height, and the higher you're up, the bigger the radius, and so you need less structures if they're taller. If they're shorter, that radius is shorter, that they are able to reach.
I mean,
I'm
we
also
could probably do
told
like
that-
one giant 400 one and just call it a day, but I don't think anybody's gonna do that.
The Ameritowers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also being told that the technology is changing so fast that the monopoles will not be necessary.
I've heard that too, but honestly, I've actually researched it a little bit to see if that was true, and it isn't. It still has that like kind of
5G still
hive.
needs a
It works.
5G needs
yeah.
locators, and it needs a transmitter too.
Yeah, they all kind of still depend on that network on the ground.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be phased out over time. But
Okay.
then we'll just reclaim the area. Like, it's still be like
Right.
the transfer station. Nothing's gonna change there. It's gonna have solar and maybe a monopole.
On a related sort of subject with changing technologies is, Optimum is pushing fiber, and they've brought fiber into certain areas of the town, and it's faster and people are switching. The problem is our revenues that we get from the cable franchise fee for being in our right-of-way, the way the federal government wrote the law, we only get revenues for cable services, and they're not considering fiber optics a cable service, because it's not going on a little cable, it's going on a fiber optic cable. We have to get the federal government to help us, or we're gonna ultimately end up not having this funding source that we've been using for our community grants. We use it for, I think, maybe SYS money, there's a few other youth services money, there's a bunch of places that money is going to. It's
about 2.5 million.
about 2.5 million, and we're in danger of having that disappear. So I'm gonna focus on it a little bit and, maybe talk to our federal reps, and they have to fix this, because it's not fair. The cable companies are still in our right-of-way, they're putting bigger and bigger cables in our right-of-way, and they're getting around the surcharge because of the inartful way that the law was written, that we only get paid for cable services. We haven't been getting paid for any of the Optimum Wi-Fi, none of that, only Cablevision. So if you have HBO and Showtime, et cetera.
And more
But more
drop
people
that
are
every
streaming
day.
and getting rid of those things, and we have been seeing less and less revenue.
Well,
And now they're rolling out fiber optics.
Even though they left the old cable up and
Well,
just
they-
bundled the new stuff with it.
Yeah,
And so now.
but they also
No,
gained a
when they-
huge customer base.
So now
When they
we're
redid
about
it-
to start losing money for HBO and Showtime, because people are getting it through fiber
Streaming.
optics. So we're gonna lose the entire revenue source.
And that
But
was
it-
designed to meet the increased bandwidth, because
Yeah.
everybody moving out here.
This is fiber optic cable that goes up on the poles.
Yes.
It also goes underground. They put in a big trunk line trying to connect.
goes
from
underground.
All the way out to their service area.
Not underground, it's above ground.
Well, in
No,
part.
some's underground, all
Just-
along,
Getting into minutia here, but it's up on the poles like copper cables, but it's fiber optic.
Yes, and we don't.
And
get
so, like, we need a definition
places.
change, we need a definition change in the statute.
paid. Right, they're in our right of way, I don't really understand it. We don't get, I think, anything from Liper or Verizon either.
Verizon
I have to
charges its
say,
customers.
the job that they did was,
Well, the utility gross heat tax, we do get,
We do get something for them being in our right of way?
yeah. But it's not nearly as much as you get for cable.
okay. That's-
And Cablevision revenues have been
Well-
dropping because people are not paying for those other services. They're just using internet, not subscribing. That's where we get the most money. They've been paying us less because they're cutting the cord, if you would, right? And then they're just down streaming, and then they don't,
Right, well, what I'm
You don't
saying
have to pay
now
for that.
is, now they'll be even able to get HBO and Showtime and the things that we did get revenue from, they'll be able to get that for fiber optics and get around the surcharge. So I think we need help at the federal
well, even
level.
that Cablevision box that everybody hates to pay $10 a month for, you don't need that really much anymore, if you're willing to just stream.
Just use,
Stream.
streaming.
And don't get rid of that box,
Yeah.
it's crazy, $10 a box, you
Right.
have 4 TVs.
Also, just the amount of development, I don't know if you ever want to think about, is there a surcharge from the development side that's causing all this stress on this infrastructure? And if there's a surcharge there, that should be made in the future if you're losing all this
I
revenue.
think you're right, I think you're right, Supervisor.
Yeah, we have-
Sounds like a badly written law.
We
that
need
needs-
some help. Now, half the poles are Verizon, half of them are PSEG, I believe, or not LIPA, and so it's sort of, and
Well,
and then they charge Altice Optimum for being on those poles, so they're actually getting paid
Yeah,
for having the
that's-
poles in our right of way, and we're getting nothing. All we had was this one surcharge for the cable services. So, Jim, maybe you and I can work on this, but I want to start getting all of the town supervisors on board. And I don't know if the villages, they're probably affected by it too.
Yeah.
Do they get their own?
You gotta share.
Yeah, they got-
Yeah, so we need to sort of mobilize on this issue because it's a shrinking revenue source that is used for good, community good, and I would hate to start telling all these not-for-profits that they're not getting grants this year because we just don't have the funding available because they switched to fiber from cable. The most,
Hold on, I won't tell you, I'm going to give them my
irrelevant.
3 boxes next week.
It's so arbitrary.
And stop using a cable phone if anybody does that too. Everybody uses a cell phone now, but we get, the charge is still the same with with people who get these packages with cable
Right.
I still have the phone.
and the
Yeah,
phone.
me too.
I still
Yeah,
have
Use it.
so you're getting kind of,
12 years.
I won't use the word here, but you just leave it.
And the board should know that when Optimum redid the lines, they didn't take the old ones down. They bundled the new ones,
Yeah, just,
please. They bundled the new ones along with the old ones. So now you have these large cables on our telephone poles. In addition to that, when they didn't take out the old ones, they didn't string the new lines. They laid it on the ground, put it up, and that's why you have those little curly cues on the ends. They took the extra and they wound it up and put it on the pole. I watched them.
Yeah, no.
Not impressed. I wish that they had did a better job on that.
No,
And now
they-
we
they
find
have-
this out.
They keep
So-
adding more wires to the
Yeah.
bundle, and then they wrap it with a wire to
And
hold it all together.
you
and
see
it's
them,
getting
you
thicker
drive
and
around.
thicker.
The wire's breaking and they're belly down and they're constantly, going back and strapping them back up.
yeah, not only that, but they also destroyed some infrastructure along, what is that, 51 into Riverhead, where they dug all that up, and then they failed to realize that there was other structure there.
There certainly is a visual impact to the
Yeah.
community from, the electric ones are kind of tiny,
Mhm.
they're thin, but the cable ones are so thick. And then to be able to escape having to pay any fees on it, because.
Maybe
of
if the
federal
cable's
law
still
says
up.
Cable services.
Because they didn't take them down.
Yeah, no,
They're
but
still
that's
there.
no, but
Anyway.
If they don't,
okay,
if they're
I'll
not
stop.
charging for cable services, we don't get the surcharge.
We still have a copper line. 'cause I'm
Anyway,
way
I just
back
wanted
in
to
the
make
woods.
you guys aware of it because it's one of the places in the budget where we're seeing reduced revenues, even though we have more people here, population's going up, more people are home and, watching TV and
working
streaming
from home.
services, we're getting less money for it. And,
How many monopoles would it take to make up the revenue?
well, I'd like the federal law to be changed to allow us to get the
18.
surcharge for all the services. that they
And I ask
provide.
again, how many monopoles
25.
would it take?
25.
They said 18.
25
25
monopoles.
poles?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't that make them
No.
multi-poles?
Because we also have, high points and rooftops and other assets that we can small cell. you know, so
But,
there's.
but
more
also
to-
there's a component, it's not just entertainment, it's people working from home, that's what, that's what caused
There
this to
was,
happen,
but
that's
they
why they
moved
put
off.
the fiber optic in the first place. And they take up a lot of bandwidth, because this is a lot of trading and a lot of stuff that goes on, because people are sitting at home doing it, so.
If they just change it from cable services to cable and
Communications.
broadband services or fiber optic, they just broaden the definition, we're fine. They just,
Plus, they don't have a competitor out here.
so somebody, I think, in Washington DC would have to sort of introduce it and get it passed, and I'm sure they'll be up against a lot of lobbying against it. But,
I don't know, in my community, there's more complaints about poor internet service than there is about dropped cell phone calls.
Yeah, because that main fiber optic trunk, people on the outside, out west, we got a lot of complaints. People are still having problems, because all the bandwidth is sucked away from them. And it's just not fair to do that to people.
so, but I will try to organize, like, sort of at the
That's-
county level, all of the supervisors and mayors, and trying to get people to sign on to some letter, maybe to Senator Schumer and, the congressional delegation from New York, is trying to get Senator Gillibrand to fix this problem. Just got to put it all together and get some legal framework. Jim, maybe if you could help me with that.
Sure. Absolutely.
In the meantime, I'll work with Glenn and we'll come up with an RFP and, for your consideration.
Cool.
Okay? Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen.
Sure. Have a good day.
Thanks, Glenn.
Still have never heard Glenn's.
All right, so before we go to executive session, we were doing updates. I felt like there might be some more people wanted to discuss. Were there any other items? Tommy John,
Nope.
do you have,
Not today.
I feel like there was something I wanted to bring up earlier, but I'm forgetting now. Okay. So then for executive session,
Are we staying here?
oh, I remember what I was gonna bring up.
Sorry.
No, it was just, I just wanted to just surprise you guys of a piece of legislation I'm working on. Summer's coming. As you know, New York State changed their laws related to recreational marijuana. And so any place right now you can smoke a cigarette, you can also smoke a marijuana cigarette. I'm working on legislation that will prohibit smoking in certain areas, therefore will also prohibit marijuana smoking. Certainly the beaches, public beaches within a certain distance of a lifeguard stand where you have families and kids, certain public park areas like the Pavilion at Ponquag Beach or Good Ground Park where we have the amphitheater, and some other facilities. I'm trying to put together a list of where currently you can smoke a cigarette, but they're basically family-oriented places where if we limit cigarette smoking, we also therefore can limit marijuana smoking. So I just want to make sure you guys are aware of that. I don't know when it'll be ready, but I think pretty soon I'll be introducing that. If you want to co-sponsor, or if you feel like I haven't included enough areas, I'm happy to work with you on, modifying that, okay?
Okay.
All right. So back to executive session. So we have acquisitions, that's CPF acquisitions, we have personnel issues, we have litigation matters, and that's it. So I will make a motion to end our work session, go into executive session on those items.
Second?
Seconded by Councilman Scavone. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned for all other reasons.
Are we here?
It would be good if we could stay.